The sack hit the boardwalk with a dull, wet thud. Dust leapt into the air and stuck to the streaks of blood already crusted into the canvas. Clara Hartwell's hands trembled as she stepped back, her bonnet shadowing her face, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Please, don't pull it." Jedediah Boone stared at the sack without touching it. The afternoon sun glared down, baking the wood beneath his boots until the boards creaked and popped. The street had gone silent. Men who had been leaning against the hitching posts froze mid-chew, pipes sagging from their lips. A gambler on the saloon porch set down his cards. Even the blacksmith's hammer paused mid-swing. Jed, Clara breathed again, closer now, her fingers clenching her skirt until the fabric wrinkled white. "Swear to me you won't." Jed's jaw worked, the muscle twitching against his whiskered cheek. He reached out, resting his callous palm on the sack. The fabric was stiff with dried blood, heavy with something solid that shifted against the touch. "Where'd you find it?" His voice was gravel, cracked dry by dust and years of unspoken regret. Her lips pressed tight, but her eyes, dark and rimmed red, did not waver. "Doesn't matter where, only that it's here, and it stays closed." The town's wind picked up, tugging her bonnet strings, rattling the loose shutter of the boarding house across the street. A tumbleweed bounced and skittered past, drawing the eyes of children who dared not come closer. Jed felt the weight of stares on his back. Folks of the frontier were drawn to blood like wolves, and now every gaze lingered on him. The rancher known for quiet strength, for keeping his land and mind his own. His reputation was the one thing he had left, and even that felt brittle beneath Clara's trembling plea. "Why bring it to me?" he asked, his fingers tightening on the sack's knot. "Because you know what it means." Her words came sharp, unflinching. A shadow crossed her face, one not cast by sun or brim. It was the shadow of memory, of nights she could not shake, of the man who had ridden into her ranch with smoke and ash trailing his horse. Jed's chest rose slow. He did know. Somewhere deep, a cold recognition stirred, the kind that scraped old scars raw. The street's stillness broke with the bray of a mule down by the watering trough, but no one moved. They were waiting for him, for her, for the sack. Clara's hands flew out, seizing his wrist before his fingers could work the knot. Her grip was small, bones thin beneath skin, yet clamped him with surprising strength. "Don't," she begged, voice rising. "Jedediah, I swear it'll kill you to know." Her eyes burned into his, not the weak eyes of a broken widow, but the burning coals of someone who had carried a fire too long in her chest. Jed's breath dragged through his nose. Sweat trickled down his temple, caught in the bristles of his beard. His hand remained on the sack, the heat of the sun clashing with the strange cold that radiated from the bundle as though it carried winter inside canvas walls. Behind them, the saloon doors creaked open, their squeak cutting across the hush. The barkeep leaned out, squinting. "Everything all right, Boone?" Jed didn't answer. Clara's grip shook on his wrist, her words coming low and fierce. "This is bigger than you, bigger than me. Leave it closed, for God's sake." He could feel his heartbeat in his palm, where it pressed the sack. The knot seemed alive beneath his touch, waiting. The longer he stood, the louder his own doubts whispered. A boy's voice piped from the hitching post, cracking with youth, but weighted with the curiosity of everyone watching. "What's in it?" The question crawled up Jed's spine. He turned slightly, enough to see the crowd that had gathered, the old, the weary, the young, the desperate, all of them bound by the same gnawing hunger for answers. "Nothing you need to know," Clara spat, her face snapping toward them, sharp as a whip crack. Her hand fell from Jed's wrist as if she had burned herself. She stepped back, chest heaving, her shadow stretching long across the dust. The sun slipped behind a cloud, dimming the street in sudden gloom. Jed's thumb pressed against the knot, and the rope's fibers scratched rough, eager to give way. Clara's voice dropped, no louder than a dying ember. "Jed, please, don't pull it." Her plea hung in the air, heavy as the silence before a storm. The storyteller's voice, ageless and worn, threads through the moment. And there he stood, with every eye upon him, with the widow's warning burning in his ear. Some say a man's fate is written in the dust long before his boots ever scuff it. Others say it's the choices he makes when the world holds its breath. Jedediah Boone was about to choose, and the desert itself seemed to wait on his hand. Jed closed his eyes for a breath, but the sack's weight was still there, dragging at his arm, at his soul. His hand tightened. The knot gave the faintest groan of resistance, and the blood ran cold in his veins. The knot snapped loose, and the canvas mouth yawned open. A blade spilled out, catching the thin strip of sun. Its steel was caked with dried blood, its hilt wrapped in cracked leather worn by 100 cruel grips. The saber lay across Jed's knees, heavy as judgment. His breath hitched. The crowd edged closer, boots scraping against boardwalk planks, voices hushed into silence. "That," Jed whispered, his thumb trembling along the etchings carved deep into the blade, "should have been buried with the war." Clara's eyes closed, her shoulders bowing as though the weight had finally been loosed upon the earth. "I told you not to look." The marks burned against Jed's sight, spirals and notches, crude but certain. He remembered them from campfires long ago, when Samuel McGraw sharpened that very steel against stone and boasted of the men it had cut down. Jed staggered to his feet, nearly dropping the saber. Dust clung to the blood like ash clings to bone. A murmur swept the street, McGraw's saber. The name rolled like thunder, old and dreaded. Clara stepped forward, her voice rising above the muttering. "He's gone. I made sure of it." Jed's gaze snapped to her, searching for a lie in the widow's face. But her jaw was set hard, her eyes dark hollows of fire. "You killed him." The words scraped out like gravel. Her nod was slight, yet unshaking. "He came to my ranch with that sword in his hand. Burned my barn, drove off my stock. Thought me too weak to stand. I wasn't." The saber gleamed in the failing light, as if remembering every cruelty it had wrought. The gambler on the porch spat, shaking his head. "McGraw's brothers won't let that rest. You bring that steel here, you bring hell with it." A chill swept Jed's spine. He had ridden with McGraw once, long before the ranch, long before he tried to wash blood from his hands in honest work. He had thought Samuel dead, lost to war or desert, but the saber proved otherwise. Or it proved that Clara had done what no regiment, no bullet had ever managed. "Why bring it here?" he asked again, his voice rough. Clara faced him square, unflinching. "Because you knew him. Because this town needs to remember what men like him were. And because his kin will ride for me, and they won't stop until they've got this steel back in their grip." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the soft whimper of a horse tied at the post, stamping nervous hooves at the unease. Jed's knuckles whitened on the hilt. "They'll come. I can hear the hoofbeats already." Clara tilted her chin, her gaze cutting down the street where canyon walls rose in the distance. The air seemed to thrum faintly, a far-off rhythm of horses striking stone. The storyteller's voice weaved low through the moment. "Evil men never rest quiet in their graves, and when their bones are stirred, they call for blood." The widow had brought forth a relic of sin, and the desert would soon demand its due. Jed let the saber hang at his side, its tip dragging a faint line in the dust. The sound was a hiss, like a snake winding through the street. "Every man he ever hurt," Jed muttered, his eyes on the line in the dirt, "will come riding with those brothers. You know that, Clara? You know what you called down." Her voice cut hard and sharp. "I didn't call them. I finished what needed doing. If they come for me." The crowd shifted uneasily. A mother clutched her boy's arm and dragged him back toward the boarding house. The blacksmith spat into the dust, his face grim. The gambler muttered, "Best throw that blade in the river before the whole town burns." Jed turned, his voice like iron breaking. "You can't wash away steel like this. River won't take it. Desert won't bury it. It's here, and it means blood's coming." Clara's hand brushed his arm, light but steady. "Then we face it." The hoofbeats grew louder now, no longer memory, no longer the tricks of fear. They echoed down the canyon, a steady drum. The sound made shutters rattle, made dogs whine under porches. Jed lifted his head. His eyes, once dulled by years of cattle and fences, burned with a cold fire. He saw in Clara's stance the same resolve. Two souls bound not by love nor by choice, but by the steel of a dead man who refused to stay buried. The saber caught the last shred of sunset, casting a red glimmer across Jed's hand. His blood ran cold, not from fear of what was to come, but from the certainty that the past had found him again. And the town, caught in the hush before storm, held its breath. The townsfolk crowded into the saloon, their faces pale beneath the lamplight. Shadows stretched across warped floorboards as the night wind howled against the shutters. Clara stood at the center, rifle slung in her arms, the barrel gleaming in the lantern's sway. "They'll be here by dawn," she said, voice steady though her hands bore the calluses of grief. "You can hide behind walls if you like, but walls won't stop men who ride for blood." A murmur rippled through the room. Some cursed under their breath. Others looked to Jed by the window, his frame slouched, yet his eyes sharp on the street outside. "We're not soldiers," a shopkeeper stammered, wringing his hat in nervous fists. "We hand over that saber," they ride on. "No need for the rest of us to bleed." Clara's eyes burned toward him. "Hand it over, and what happens when the next rider comes through? When another pack of wolves smells weakness? You think surrender buys peace? No, it buys chains." The gambler barked a laugh, sharp and bitter. Easy word from a widow with nothing left to lose. The room stilled. Clara leveled the rifle across her chest, not aiming, but holding it as naturally as one might hold a child. Her eyes never left the gambler's. "I lost more than you'll ever carry," she said, her tone low and cutting. "That's why I won't lose again." Jed turned from the window, his voice rough. "She's right. You give wolves what they ask for, they only come hungrier. McGraw's brothers won't stop with a blade. They'll want the town, the land, and every soul weak enough to bow." The silence that followed was thick with fear. Boots shuffled. Cards sat untouched. The storyteller's voice wove through the tension. "Fear is a sickness that spreads quick, but so does courage, if there's one heart strong enough to carry it first." Clara stepped to the bar, set her rifle down, and with swift hands began to check the cartridges, sliding brass into chambers with clicks that echoed louder than words. "My husband taught me to shoot. He said a steady hand saves more lives than a trembling prayer." I aimed to be steady. A young ranch hand, no older than 17, swallowed hard. "Ma'am, can you really do it? Can you face him?" Her eyes softened just enough to meet his. "Son, I already have." Jed pushed away from the window and dragged a chair into the circle of lamplight. He lowered himself onto it slow, as though the weight of memory pressed heavier than his own body. "You all don't know the half of it. Samuel McGraw wasn't just a raider. He was a storm that tore through camps and towns alike. And I once rode beside him." The room shifted uneasily. Jed's jaw clenched. "I thought I could forget. Thought I could plant cattle and let the past rot in the desert. But that blade." He jerked his head toward the blood-stained saber propped against the wall. "Don't let the past lie. Now his kin are coming, and it's on me as much as her." Clara's gaze locked on him, unwavering. "Then stand with me. Whatever your shame was, you'll wash it clean only here, in the dust, with them staring down the barrel." The blacksmith grunted, stepping forward, thick arms folded. "I'll fight. Dan McGraw took my cousin's farm years back. I've waited long enough." Others shifted, torn between fear and fury. A farmer shook his head, muttering, "Ain't worth dying over," as he slipped out into the night. But two men followed the blacksmith's lead, setting their jaws firm. Clara nodded once, as though sealing a pact. She laid the rifle on the bar, the metal gleaming under the lamplight. "Any who stand, stand with me. Any who flee, flee now. But when the dawn comes, don't claim you weren't given a choice." The gambler looked away, ashamed. The boy ranch hand stepped forward, hands shaking but eyes fierce. "I'll stand." Jed's hand brushed the saber's hilt where it rested against the wall. His skin prickled cold at the touch, as though frost crawled up his arm. He pulled away slow, turned to Clara. "You're leading us, widow," he said, voice rough with something between fear and awe. Her face was drawn, tired, yet her stance bore no bend. "I'm not leading. I'm standing." If you want to call that leading, so be it. The storyteller's voice rose again, steady as the desert wind. There are men who bend towns to their will with fear, and there are women who steady their hands against sorrow. And in that steadiness, the world shifts. That night, the widow's burden became the town's. Outside, the hoofbeats grew louder, no longer distant, no longer imagined. A coyote yelped once, then fell silent. The air itself seemed to wait. Clara picked up the rifle again, cradling it against her shoulder, her eyes fixed on a shuttered window, as if she could already see dawn's riders casting their long shadows across the street. Jed's voice was a low rumble at her side. When it comes, we hold. No running. No begging. We hold. Her reply was a whisper, yet carried stronger than any shout. Until the last bullet. The lamplight flickered, shadows shivered on the walls, and the town of Boone's Crossing braced itself for morning. Dawn broke, with hooves pounding like war drums. Dust billowed at the canyon mouth, and 6 riders burst into the street, their shadows long and jagged against the rising sun. The McGraw brothers, faces hard as stone, eyes sharp with vengeance, rode in silence, their rifles slung low, pistols glinting. The town waited. Doors were barred, windows shuttered, and the saloon stood like a fortress with its lamps still burning from the long night. Inside, Clara Hartwell stood at the window, rifle braced against her shoulder, her eyes narrow and unblinking. Jedediah Boone leaned against the doorframe, pale for blood loss where a bullet from last night's skirmish had grazed him, yet still upright, the saber's hilt in his grip. The riders halted, the leader, Ezekiel McGraw, spitting into the dirt. His voice cut sharp across the silent street. "Bring out the widow. Bring out the blade. Do that, and maybe we'll leave enough of you to bury the dead." Clara stepped through the saloon doors before anyone could stop her. The crowd inside gasped, but she walked steady, the rifle in her hands, her skirt brushing the dust. Her shadow stretched long toward the McGraw gang, the morning sun casting her like a giant across the earth. "You'll get neither," she said, her voice flat, carrying clear across the square. Ezekiel barked a laugh, though his eyes narrowed. "You think one woman can stand against us? You think this town will die for you?" The gambler's voice rose behind the saloon doors, trembling but loud. "We'll stand." Others echoed him, the words raw, breaking but true. A shutter flew open, and a rifle barrel jutted from a second-story window. The blacksmith strode out with his hammer in hand, standing near Clara. The boy ranch hand stumbled into the open, clutching a pistol too big for his grip, but holding it like a lifeline. Ezekiel's smirk faltered. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. "I already buried one McGraw. I'll bury the rest if I must." The street held its breath. Then steel rasped from holsters, and the guns of dawn spoke. The first shot cracked like thunder. Dust leapt from the ground as lead tore through the street. Clara dropped to one knee, her rifle bucking against her shoulder, smoke rising from the muzzle. One of the riders pitched sideways from his saddle, crashing into the dirt. The blacksmith roared, swinging his hammer into the chest of a charging outlaw who had leapt from his horse. Bone and iron collided, the man collapsing with a scream. Jed staggered from the doorway, saber in hand, his shirt stained red, but his grip steady. With a guttural cry, he slashed upward, the steel catching sunlight, striking the rifle clean from a rider's grasp. The memory of McGraw's old cruelty surged in him, but this time the blade sang for redemption. Bullets shattered glass, splinters flying from the saloon's frame. The boy fired blindly, the kick spinning him, but his shot struck true, dropping another man in the dust. Ezekiel dismounted slow, every step deliberate, eyes fixed on Clara. Gunfire raged around them, but he walked as though the chaos parted for him. He drew a long pistol, its barrel black as coal. Clara rose from her knee, her rifle smoking, her breath steady. "This ends with you." His grin showed rotten teeth. "No, widow. It ends with you." They stood 10 paces apart. The saloon doors flapped as townsfolk fired from cover, screams mixing with thunderclaps of lead. But here, in the dust, it was silent but for the wind. Ezekiel's arm jerked upward, his pistol spitting flame. Clara fired the same breath. The street echoed with both shots as one. Ezekiel staggered, clutching his chest, eyes wide in disbelief before he toppled backward into the dust. Clara's rifle lowered, smoke curling from the barrel, her eyes never leaving the body until it stilled. The remaining riders broke, one fleeing for the canyon, another cut down by townsfolk's fire. The street grew quiet, save for the labored breaths of the living and the moans of the dying. Jed sank to his knees, the saber slipping from his hand, its point sinking into the dirt. His head bowed, sweat and blood mingling on his brow. Clara hurried to him, kneeling close. "You're hit bad," she whispered. He shook his head weakly. "No worse than I deserve." His gaze lifted to hers, cold and hollow but steady. "But you carried this town." The storyteller's voice rose, woven with the hush of dawn. "They say the widow's shot echoed through the canyons for days, that the dust itself carried her defiance. They say Jedediah Boone's blood froze that morning, not from fear, but from the chill of truth, that he had ridden once with darkness, and at last stood against it." Clara touched his shoulder, her eyes soft but unbroken. "It wasn't me alone. You stood too." He let out a ragged laugh, the sound cracked but real. Maybe the story will say it that way. The townsfolk gathered, stepping from shadows, rifles lowered. The gambler tipped his hat low. The boy smiled through trembling lips, and the blacksmith stood with blood on his hammer, nodding to Clara in silent thanks. The dead lay still, the street littered with blood and shell casings. But the morning light cut clean across Boone's Crossing. For the first time in years, it felt like hope. The storyteller's voice faded into the desert wind. And so the widow bore her burden and turned sorrow into steel. The rancher's blood froze with the truth of his sins, but his name and hers rode on the wind. Some tales die in the dust. Others live forever in the telling.